the end of today's lesson, you should be able to make a simple corner bracket like this to be able to mount different parts for your robots. I'm Mr. Pratt, and I've been teaching students CAD and robotics for over 10 years now. So on Fusion, everything starts, and the basic workflow is effectively taking a two-dimensional sketch and pulling it out into three-dimensional space. So for a quick example, let's just try something like that. Up in the top in our toolbar, in the solid workspace, we're going to go ahead and click Create Sketch. And once you select Create Sketch, it's going to ask you to select a different plane. If we look at our view cube here, we can see our top, our front, and our right. And we can select different planes that would be, say, the top of our cube, the front of our cube, or the right of our cube. Or sorry, the right of our cube. For me, I'm going to choose the top of the cube, which is going to be on the XY plane. This red X, and then this green Y plane. So I'll go ahead and select that. You notice that it automatically tilts my screen to be able to see directly on top of the XY plane. You'll also notice that my tools panel has changed. Instead of using the solid tools, we're now looking at the sketch tools. For the sketch tools, it's exactly the same as you would use in a lot of drawing programs, to be honest. It kind of feels a bit like Microsoft Paint. So you can grab lines, two-point rectangles, circles, splines, mirrors. You can make ellipses, polygons. There's a lot of different things you can make. So for example, let's just take a two-point rectangle. I'll click on this. And you always want to start your sketches from the origin point. This is this little circle with these dashed lines. This basically keeps your designs centered in place. So I'm going to go ahead and click to place my first corner. I can drag up, and it doesn't matter what dimensions you choose. I'll just click to finish off this. Now in order to bring my square into 3D space, I'm going to go ahead and click on the solid atmosphere or the solid work toolbox, and then go ahead and select Extrude. It'll automatically select the face that we just drew, and now if I were to click and drag, you can see we're actually starting to drag this into 3D space. You can also type in exact measurements if you want, or you can click and drag. You can even change the taper at which you are dragging things out. I'm going to choose 0 degrees for now because we're going to be making this as a 3D bracket. So I'll choose OK. You'll notice that we now have two features down on the bottom of our parametric timeline. We have our sketch and we have our extrude. Now this is the real magic of using Fusion as a CAD software. Is if I go ahead and right click, edit the sketch, or I double click on it, I can actually edit this sketch. Now on a sketch, anything that is black, you really can't change. It's a constrained or fully constrained section of that sketch. We'll talk more about that in the future, but effectively, you can't click and drag on black sections. Blue tools, you can. So if I click and drag on these blue sections, you'll notice that I can actually grab and move these to any size I want. So where we had a square before, let's try to make a rectangle. And if I click Finish Sketch, you'll notice that my extrude automatically adapted to the sketch. And that's what a parametric modeling is all about. You can go back, make changes, and those changes will propagate across the rest of your sketch. Super, super handy. So let's get started actually drawing our component here. So let's go back and we're going to edit our sketch. And we're going to add a few more constraints here. Instead of just randomly choosing a size, we're actually going to go ahead and put in some dimensions. So up on the sketch tool here, I can go ahead and click on the sketch dimensions. I can select, oh, sorry, I already had the line selected. I'm going to press escape to deselect a line. Now I'll select the sketch dimensions again. I'll select this far left-hand line and drag out. It doesn't matter how far out I drag here. This is effectively just going to show me the dimension of this blue line here. So if I click, it's going to show that dimension. It's going to give me some time to type it in. So for me, I'm going to select 24 millimeters as my initial height. You'll now notice that I can no longer drag this top blue bar. It's now being black. That's because it's now being constrained because there's been a dimension applied to it. So I wouldn't be able to drag this. I can, however, still drag this side because I haven't defined the distance here. So let's go ahead and grab one more sketch. Oops, I am still selected. I'll press escape. I'll go ahead and select this top line, grab my sketch dimension, drag out. Again, it doesn't matter where I put this. It's just saying what's easiest visually to see this. So for me, I'm actually going to select it down here I'm going to select 48 millimeters. Because I'm trying to create a part that's going to fit well with a GoBilda piece, 24 by 48, the width of those structural bars are 48 mil, and that's going to make life really easy. If I press escape to get off of my tool, you'll now notice that I can no longer click and drag any of these sections. If I go to the browser panel, you'll notice that the sketch one has this little lock icon on it. That means that all of the pieces inside of the sketch are currently constrained, and that is good. We want fully constrained sketches because that allows our parametric models to adapt easier over time effectively. Let's go ahead and let's add in this kind of 30-degree angle bracket. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a line. I'll grab from the corner here, and you can honestly choose wherever you want. You could choose a specific length right now if you want to. You can also press Tab to select the degrees at this point. And here you could select, say, 120 if you want to do it that way. You could select 30 degrees at this point. You could select a 90-degree angle or a 60-degree angle, which is going to give us that 30 that we want. So you could select it this way, and you notice that that line gets constrained. You can also, it kind of draws out this imaginary line here. It's called the construction line. It's not a real piece of geometry, and we can't actually edit with it. You can also, we'll actually delete that line, and we'll go ahead and delete this one as well. I can also just drag a line out, put it wherever I want. I can press this little checkbox to finish off my line. And then I can grab this sketch dimension, click on my object, click on the second one, and you notice that an angle automatically comes up. Ooh, that was pretty good. I almost hit 120 right away. And we're going to put in 120 degrees. So when I select that, my line is automatically going to be constrained at 120. You'll notice I can grab this blue dot at the end and select the length that I want because we haven't put a length on this yet. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll put in sketch dimension, and we'll call this one 48 millimeters. You could make this longer if you wanted to, but for now I'm just going to select 48. And I'm going to grab another line. We'll go ahead and just drag this out. You can put this wherever you want. I'm just going to put it over here just for example. Now we would want this obviously to be parallel with this other piece. And if I were to hover up over here, you can actually drag off, and you'll notice that Fusion's going to try to create some lines for me to be able to keep that symmetry. But just to show you an example that I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and click over here and finish off that. Now, let's make this line up with this part here. So up at the top here are these things called constraints. Yeah, we've been talking about these a little bit. But what I can do is I'm going to go ahead and grab this parallel constraint, and it's going to constrain two lines so they always stay parallel to one another. So if I click on this string, I can grab my first line, grab my second line, and you notice that now it automatically snaps them to be parallel. You can also notice that I have this constraint applied that says, hey, these two lines are parallel with one another. So if I were to click and drag this, no matter where I move this with my mouse, these two lines are going to stay parallel now. Now you'll notice that these are no longer the same height. I want them to be the same. Two ways to do that. I could grab my sketch dimension out and make this 48. The problem with doing that is now I'm starting to add a few too many dimensions. And what would be better if I were to constrain these to be equal. So if I come up and grab this red and kind of gray charcoal line underneath, it's going to make two lines or two objects the same size. It's going to make them equal. So if I click on this and I come from my this to my that, you'll now notice that these two are equal. So if I come up and I change this 48, let's say we make it 96. Now my second line automatically updated. If I had put a dimension on this left hand side, I wouldn't be able to automatically update that. We'll go ahead and undo that, and we'll keep it at 48 for now. Now I want to show you something different about Fusion as well. If I click Finish Sketch, and I show this sketch, if I try to extrude, you'll notice that the only face that I can select is this bottom face here. I cannot select this top face here. That's because in Fusion, you can only extrude complete and closed in faces. So let's go back and edit that sketch. Let's grab a line, And let's close off our sketch here. You'll notice that when I closed off that face, it automatically highlighted blue. That means that I can now edit the size of this face. Or at least, sorry, not edit. That means that now I can extrude this face. So let's go ahead and finish our sketch. And you'll notice that now we've got our point. I'm going to go ahead and hide this sketch again because we're going to edit our extrude. Rather than adding a new one, we're going to go back and edit this one. So as I change this extrude, I'm actually going to select both faces this time, so it pulls out both faces all at once. And I'm going to make this a width of 5 mil. If you're going to use plywood, 4 mil is generally pretty good for a bracket. Then you can do them layered together. If you're going to 3D print this bracket, you might make it 5 millimeters. That tends to be a pretty good width for a little extra structural stability. Now on this extrude tool, we'll talk more about this in the future, but effectively we want to have a distance of 5. We'll have an operation of a new body. When I click OK, you're going to notice up at the top, I now have a new folder that shows up in my browsers. I have my sketches folder, and if I open up this bodies, I now have a body folder. So I've got one solid body actually created on my piece. So in order to make this something we can actually use as a bracket, we're going to have some holes in it so we can actually mount it to something. So let's go ahead and actually add in some holes. I'm going to go ahead and create a new sketch. And for sketches, you can set them on planes, but you can also create a sketch on faces themselves. And in this case, I'm going to create a sketch on this face. And I want to have a nice rectangle hole pattern all the way showing up here. So what I'm going to do, at least with GoBilda parts, they work on a 8 millimeter grid with 4 millimeter holes. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a rectangle, and I'm going to grab in the bottom corner here. But before I place this, I don't want this to have real geometry because we want to put a circle in. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. And over on the right hand side here, my options panel, I'm going to go ahead and click on this line type where it says construction. If I click on this construction line and I go to put my rectangle in, you can notice that now I have these dashed lines. These dashed lines you cannot extrude, you cannot change, but it is going to help us with lining up our circle with where we want a circle to be. So I'm going to go ahead and type in the number 4. You'll notice that I just have a little lock symbol there because now I put a constraint in. I'm going to press tab, press 4 again, and now I've got a 4x4 rectangle that I can work with. I also could just choose the size rectangle I want, put in my sketch dimensions, but for now I'm just going to put in 4x4. Then we're going to go up and grab our circle tool. We're going to line ourselves up right on this corner. You'll notice that we automatically snap in Fusion. And I'm going to deselect my construction line. And GoBilda works with a 4 millimeter pattern. So if you're going to laser cut this out, 4 millimeters is probably good. I'm going to choose 4.3 because I find that a 4.3 hole on a, or at least on the 3D printers that we use, is a pretty good size. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my solid tool, grab my extrude, or you can press E on your keyboard, select the face that I want, and I'm going to drag this up or down, and you'll notice that the extrude tool can be used to also cut pieces through. So last time we created a new body. This time we're actually going to cut through our piece. And you notice that Fusion's smart enough to actually select the correct operation for us. I'm going to select my exact 5 millimeters and then select OK. Now, I just made a bit of a faux pas in parametric modeling, and I'll show you why. Let's go back to my extrude number 1, and let's say, for example, we find that 5 millimeters is not thick enough. We actually want to make this thicker. Let's make it 10 millimeters. Where'd our hole go? If I come back up, you notice that our hole is still there, but it only has a depth of 5 millimeters because we only made that cut 5 millimeters. So rather than choosing an exact depth, what I'll do is over here for extent type, rather than distance, I'm going to say to object. And what to object lets us do is we can select the face at the end, and it's automatically going to cut through that hole to the whole length of the object. So So if I select OK, now I can go back and edit this first sketch. I can make it even deeper. Let's just make it something stupid like 17 millimeters. And you notice that that hole cuts clean through every time. So having that to object when you're extruding through holes can really help. Let's change that back to something more appropriate like 5 millimeters though, because that's getting a little crazy. Now, what we could do is we could actually go back to our sketch. We could put in another circle, make it 4.3. We could line it up so that our pieces are 8 millimeters centered across from each other. We could go ahead and line these up so that that dot lines up in center. But that's going to take forever to be able to line up all of these holes. Rather than doing that, we're going to use the rectangular pattern feature in Fusion. And what rectangular pattern lets us do is it lets us take a feature and copy it across. So I'm going to come up here to my solid workspace. I'm going to select rectangular pattern. When I select that, underneath rectangular pattern there, you can pattern bodies, faces, features, and components. We'll talk more about these later, but we already know what a body is. So if I were to select body and I were to select this body here, and for axes, I could select this top axis, and you notice that now I can actually drag out and I can actually create multiple copies of this one body, which is pretty cool. But what we want to do is we want to create multiple copies of our whole. So I'm going to go ahead and click rectangular pattern. Rather than selecting bodies, we're going to select features. And now I can actually select a feature in the timeline. In my case, I'm going to select this extrude number 2. And then for the axes, we're going to select this top face edge and this face edge. If I click and drag out, you'll now notice that our hole is actually starting to drag out into our shape. Now I'm going to click on the top for this view cube here so we can get something a little better. And underneath the axes, there's distribution. You can distribute it by spacing or by extent for how long our piece is. Now for GoBilda pieces, we're going to select spacing, and the spacing is 8 millimeters by 8 millimeters. And I can go ahead and select more quantity on my axis 1, and I think 6 looks about right. So I'm pretty happy with that. If I select OK, or right before I select OK, underneath here is this compute type. There's optimize, identical, and adjust. I'm going to select optimized. Depending how fast your computer is, optimized was going to be a little easier on your resources. Select OK. And now you can see that I've actually cut through a whole bunch of these rectangular pieces. Last thing we're going to do for this corner bracket before we finish this off is we're going to do the same thing again for a rectangular pattern. But you can probably see we're going to run into a bit of a problem right now in the future. So let's go ahead and create one last sketch on this top face again. And I'm going to come up and select this offset tool. And what an offset tool lets me do is lets me grab a path. I can actually drag in and choose a specific offset of all those lines. So it's actually going to offset this line by 4. But if you find it's on the wrong side, you can put it in -4, and it's actually going to put it in on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and select OK. And now we've got a 4 millimeter piece in here that we can work with on the corner. Let's grab another circle, turn off our construct line, and we're going to make this 4.3 again. And I'm going to finish my sketch. Now before I go ahead and actually rectangular pattern this out, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename my bodies here. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this, say, main bracket. I'm also going to rename my sketches. Sketch 1, we can call it the bracket body. Sketch 2, we can call it the top hole. And sketch 3, we can call it the angled hole. It's good practice to rename your sketches so that you know what it is you're working and editing through. I'm going to go ahead and select my Extrude tool again, grab this, look on the other side, I'm going to pull it in, and again, rather than selecting distance, I'm going to say to object, select that top face, and now it's going to always cut through no matter what we do. Last thing to finish off this tool, we're going to rectangular pattern, make sure we have features selected, we'll select the feature in our timeline. And then for our axes, I'm going to select this top axis and this side axis, and you notice that it is automatically going to match our angle for that as well, which is pretty cool. So let's go ahead and change for spacing. Our spacing is 8 millimeters by 8 millimeters. And let's go ahead and add in a few more copies here. It looks like 6 is about right on the side, and 6 is about right on that side. But for a 3D printed part, that's going to be pretty narrow. So I think I might actually only make it 5. Choose OK. And then I'm actually going to move this whole pattern this way. On the camera, sorry, that way a little bit. So let's go back and edit our sketch. And I don't like how close this is to the wall. I like that it's about 4 millimeters up off the bottom, but it's not very useful for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go ahead and delete this offset. So now that we can move this circle freely, and I'm going to go ahead and grab a dimension line out from this center dot to the bottom line. I want that to be 4 millimeters. And now you'll notice if I go to drag this circle around, it's stuck at 4 millimeters exactly. So I want it to be 4 mil here, but I'm not sure how far I want to be from this distance. So I'm going to grab another sketch dimension from my dot and this line here. And, oh, sorry, I didn't grab that. I'm going to grab another sketch dimension from the center point on the circle to this point. And let's say something like 5 millimeters. So let's finish the sketch and see what that looks like. I want that to be a little bit more centered. So let's go back, edit that sketch a little more. Let's expand this to maybe say 10. 10 is probably a little too far. So maybe let's do 7.5. And that looks about right for what it is that I want on my pattern here. That is making a simple corner bracket. I could really easily take one piece, mount it up top, take a second piece, and have a nice 30-degree mounted bracket. So basic workflow in Fusion: make a two-dimensional sketch, pull it up in 3D, make another sketch, cut through those pieces, and then repeat on a bunch of different axes. And that's kind of the main basic workflow. So I hope you found that useful, and I'll see you in the next one. We're going to talk more about different sketching tools you can use and the large variety of shapes that you can make in Fusion 360.